Oh, that's quite a moment. Steve Coogan joins us now. Morning, Steve.
Morning.
Morning.
You, the accent, when it comes to Brian Walden, I think is possibly one of the hardest things to get right. But you absolutely nail it in this. How on earth did you manage that?
Well, years ago, I used to do a programme called Spitting Image, where I do lots of accents. Before, when I did more comedy in those days. I didn't do as much drama, but it was quite a useful sort of training camp, Spitting Image, because you get to learn lots of different public figures, and Was he one of them back then? Did you do him?
There's a puppet of Brian.
Puppet of Brian Walden. At the time, he was quite a significant figure. A lot of younger viewers might not remember him, but he was part of the political landscape at the time, and sort of a giant of the political interview. So, so there's a lot of material out there to study when you're playing someone like that.
And the interesting thing that I hadn't realised until I watched this is the friendship that he had with Margaret Thatcher. He'd been a Labour MP, she was from obviously the other side, but he helped write some of her speeches. He'd go to Downing Street for a whiskey with her late at night.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting story because there would have been natural political adversaries early on, but he became very friendly with her because I think that the two of them, well, he was certainly outside the political establishment in those days. You know, the whole political landscape was littered with people who'd been through the public school system, and that's sort of the normal there's a sort of privileged route to power, and Margaret Thatcher fell outside of that, and so did Brian Walden. They were state educated, and they sort of bonded over that and felt like they were slightly outside everyone. I mean, almost everyone else in her cabinet was privately educated, and she had a great antipathy towards them, and so they bonded over that, and it helped them to cross the political dividing line. And
it's clear that she trusted him, didn't she?
Well, I mean, the question marks are what he did, because journalistically, if you write speeches for a politician, that's a sort of red line that you shouldn't cross, and he did, because he was so enamoured with her. And I think he was more enamoured with her than she was with him. But he certainly helped her at the 1983 election with some of her speeches. And he'd become disillusioned with the Labour Party. But it's sort of the story, the Brian and Maggie story, is about a sort of ultimately, you know, through his friendship, he comes to a point where he has to choose between doing his journalistic duty and looking after his friend. And when she was on the ropes towards the end of her leadership, she's sometimes deified by the Conservative Party, but people forget that that they were the people who got rid of her, her own people. But that was a very sort of precarious time for her. And when she had this interview lined up with Brian Walden, Nigel Lawson, who was the Chancellor at the time, had resigned, and she was coming in for more and more criticism, and he decided to choose journalism over his friendship.
And you can see in her eyes almost, can't you, the moment that she realises that he's...
Yeah, he's not going to save her.
No.
And you know, he did the right thing. You know, I was no fan of Margaret Thatcher growing up, and I'm still not now. I think her legacy is one that's not, you know, the huge Thatcherite experiment 30 years later. I think lots of people can argue that a few people benefited from it, but society at large was damaged by it. In fact, there's a line in the drama that says, we used to have communities, now we just have stuff. And I think that's sort of, for me, is her legacy.
Written by James Graham, of course, who people will know from Sherwood on the BBC, from Dear England on the stage.
That's right,
He's a fantastic...
Well, James Graham sort of owned the political subject matter in theatre. Written many brilliant plays about the history of politics over the last 40, 50 years in Britain.
Reversion Boys from the Black stuff, didn't he, a year or so ago?
That's right, yeah. He's ubiquitous. And I mean, the idea for this came to me via a producer called Rob Burley, who until recently produced Andrew Marr's show. And he believe you know him, Sally?
Yes.
And he came along and said, I've got an interesting story, a sort of different way of approaching that Thatcher. We were all used to seeing Thatcher in the Falklands and in the Crown and all the rest of it, but this is a more sort of, I think, interesting, unknown story.
And also, it showcases something we don't see so much of anymore, which is a long political interview. It's just not something that we see regularly, we even hear on the radio or see on the television anymore. And that's how it used to be. It was almost like doing an A-level on the television, wasn't it? It was a proper examination.
Well, for all my antipathy towards the legacy of Margaret Thatcher, I will, you know, I have to acknowledge that compared with politicians these days, who all speak in sound bites and are surrounded by special advisors. And
Maybe don't always answer the question.
And don't, of course, have all had media training so that they know how to swerve a question and just say what they want to say and not what's being asked. And she did answer the question. And also it was quite clear she had a clear point of view, even if you disagreed with it. I mean, at the time, even Tony Benn was respectful. The two of them had a mutual respect because they thought that their world views and their points of view were very clear. Unlike a lot of politicians today who seem to want to please all the people all the time and just avoid saying the wrong thing. So there's a real sort of risk aversion around in politics at the time. And she wasn't scared of being unpopular, that's for sure. Do
you enjoy the way, or you obviously do because it's what you're doing, but the way your career has gone? As you said, back in the day, Spitting Image, a lot more comedy. You did Savile not that long ago, now Brian Walden, and I know you've done many others as well, but taking on serious, in inverted commas, acting roles is...
Well, I've been doing it sort of a few years now, probably since Philomena, which is 10 years ago. The film I did with Dame Judi Dench, and that sort of changed things for me and opened sort of new avenues for me.
Do you think that was a turning point?
Well, it certainly was for me because, you know, because I produced and wrote that film with Jeff Pope, I was able to cast myself.
That's helpful.
Had I not, I would not...
Clever move.
Well, it is. I mean, in fact, I think actually at the time I do remember saying when I met Dame Judi and asked her about that film, she said, "Who are you thinking of playing Martin?" And I was saying, "Well, we were thinking of me." And I remember she said, "And is that negotiable?" And I said, "No." And she laughed and said, "All right then."
You said no to Dame Judi.
Yeah. But I think she liked the fact that I was unequivocal and clear, like
someone else.
And if you don't let me
clear, unlike modern politicians. But no, that was a turning point and enabled me to do different, more dramatic roles. But I still do. You know, I love comedy. I've just finished shooting yet another Alan Partridge series.
Go on, tell us. I'm a bit scared to ask you about that, considering where we are, but go on.
I mean, I'm not sure when it's out, but it's soon-ish. It's called How Are You? And it's about the mental health of the nation, basically. Okay. It's a very serious subject matter that he
and Alan, I can't imagine how...
mangles,
I was going to say, I can't imagine how Alan would handle a sensitive subject.
Yeah. Well, you can, I'm sure you can. You try.
Yeah, foot in mouth moment all the way along. And do you have any plans for any more serious roles in the pipeline as well?
Well, there's I did a film in Ireland recently about playing Mick McCarthy, the manager of the Ireland football team, about that period during that tumultuous period with Roy Keane.
Yes.
Who plays Roy Keane?
Éanna Hardwick, a brilliant new Irish actor who was in a drama called The Sixth Commandment recently, and very, very talented Irish actor. But, I've counted it. I think I played 11 real people at the time. It started with Tony Wilson, and since then I've played Stan Laurel and a few others. Paul Raymond.
One day someone's going to have to play Steve Coogan.
I'd love to audition for it.
You should write it when you can cast yourself.
That's true, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Really wish you all the best with it. Thank you.
And Brian and Maggie airs